The moment I stopped explaining myself didn't come with an argument, it came with silence. My name is Margaret. I was 71 years old, sitting at the end of my dining table, listening to people talk about my life as if I wasn't there. They meant well. That was always the problem. They discussed what I should do next, where I should live, what would be easier for me. No one asked what I wanted, because for years I had trained them not to. After my husband passed away, concern replaced conversation. My children checked in constantly, neighbors watched closely, friends spoke softly like I might break. I became a shared responsibility. They offered help before I asked, advice before I spoke, solutions before listening. At first, I accepted it gratefully. Grief makes you tired. But as months turned into years, the concern hardened into assumption that I couldn't manage stairs, that driving was a lot, that living alone was a risk. One evening, my daughter said it plainly. "Mom, have you thought about moving closer to us, or maybe assisted living?" She said it gently, carefully, as if careful words make decisions less final. I looked at her across the table, at the woman I had raised to be independent. "I'm not confused," I said. "I'm just quiet." She smiled politely, but I could see it. She thought I didn't know what I was doing. That night, I lay awake replaying every moment I had deferred. Every time I said, "Whatever you think is best." It had been easier. It had also erased me. The next morning, I made coffee and sat by the window. I watched the street wake up. People walking dogs, cars starting, life continuing without consultation. I realized something uncomfortable. I had been living like my decisions were provisional, like someone else would eventually approve them. That afternoon, my son called. He spoke about logistics, timelines, options. I listened. Then I interrupted him. "I've decided I'm not moving," I said. There was silence. Not anger, adjustment. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Yes," I replied, not defensively, clearly. He didn't argue, but I knew the real conversation hadn't happened yet. That night I wrote something down, not for them, for me. I don't owe explanations for a life I am still capable of living. The words felt heavy and freeing. I didn't know what would change next, only that I wouldn't be negotiating my existence anymore. And that decision, quiet as it was the beginning of something irreversible. The resistance didn't arrive all at once. It came in layers. Phone calls that lasted a little longer than usual, messages that began with "just checking," questions disguised as concern. My children didn't argue with my decision, they circled it. They sent articles about safety, shared stories about friends' parents who had suddenly declined, suggested changes that sounded small but felt permanent. I listened without interrupting, not because I agreed, because I wanted to understand what frightened them. It wasn't my age, it was my independence. For years I had been predictable, available, accommodating, easy to plan around. Now I had disrupted that rhythm. One afternoon, my daughter stopped by unannounced. She looked around the house carefully, as if inventorying risks. "The stairs are steep," she said casually. "They've always been," I replied. She nodded, then added, "We just worry." I set the kettle down and looked at her. "I know," I said, "but worry doesn't get to decide for me." She looked surprised. Not hurt, surprised. That night, I felt the familiar pull toward guilt, the urge to soften my stance, to reassure everyone that I wasn't becoming difficult. I reminded myself of something important. Boundaries feel harsh only to those who benefited from your flexibility. The next test came at a family gathering. My son brought up housing again, lightly, jokingly. I didn't smile this time. "I've already answered that," I said. The table went quiet. Then conversation moved on. No explosion, no drama, just a shift. Later, my sister pulled me aside. "You're being firm lately," she said. "I'm being clear," I replied. She studied me for a moment, then smiled. "It suits you." That surprised me more than criticism would have. At home, I began making small decisions without consulting anyone. I rearranged furniture. I planned a short solo trip. I enrolled in a local history course. Nothing reckless, nothing symbolic, just ordinary choices made without apology. The more I practiced deciding, the steadier I became. I noticed how often women my age were expected to fade quietly, to become agreeable background figures. I had done that once. I wasn't doing it again. One evening, my son called. He sounded tired. "Mom," he said, "I think I'm having trouble adjusting." "I understand," I replied. "I had trouble adjusting when everyone else decided for me." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I didn't realize how often we did that." Neither had I until I stopped allowing it. The tension didn't disappear, but it changed shape. It became conversation instead of pressure, dialogue instead of assumption. I wasn't pushing people away, I was teaching them where I stood, and where I stood was solid. The consequences didn't arrive loudly. They arrived quietly, in the spaces where people used to fill in the blanks for me. I noticed it first in the pauses, longer silences on the phone, fewer suggestions offered automatically, moments where my children waited just a little before speaking. At first, those pauses felt uncomfortable. I had spent years smoothing conversations, anticipating needs, filling gaps so no one else had to sit with uncertainty. Now I was letting the uncertainty stay, and strangely, it didn't collapse anything. One afternoon, I drove to a nearby coastal town alone. Nothing dramatic, just a few hours by the water. I didn't tell anyone in advance, not out of secrecy, out of self-trust. As I walked along the shoreline, I realized how long it had been since I had gone somewhere without explaining why, without offering reassurance in advance. I sat on a bench and watched the tide move in and out, steady, unbothered. It reminded me that motion doesn't need permission. When I returned home that evening, my phone showed a missed call from my daughter. I called her back. "I was worried," she said. "You didn't answer earlier." "I was out," I replied. "I'm home now." There was a pause. Then she said, "Okay." Not relieved, accepting. That was new. Over the next weeks, small things shifted. My son stopped checking in daily. My daughter asked instead of advised. My sister stopped translating family concerns into warnings. They were learning something. So was I. The hardest adjustment wasn't theirs. It was mine. I had to resist the urge to over-explain, to justify my choices with logic they could approve. One evening, my neighbor asked where I'd been earlier that day. "Out," I said. She laughed. "Doing what?" "Living," I replied. It surprised both of us. I began noticing how often older women are asked to account for their time, as if independence requires documentation. I stopped providing it, not defiantly, calmly. At a local meeting I attended regularly, someone suggested I take a smaller role to reduce stress. I smiled politely. "I'll decide that," I said. The room adjusted. No confrontation, just recalibration. That night, I sat at my dining table again, the same place where people had once spoken over me. This time, I was alone, not lonely. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Ownership. of my schedule, of my space, of my voice. I realized then that independence isn't about doing everything alone. It's about being the final authority in your own life. At 71, I hadn't become stubborn. I had become aligned, and alignment, I was learning, changes everything quietly. The calm didn't arrive because everyone finally agreed with me. It arrived because I stopped needing agreement. The changes around me were subtle. My children still worried. My sisters still checked in. Concern didn't disappear, but it softened. It learned new boundaries. I noticed it one afternoon when my daughter called and asked, "What are you up to today?" Not, "Where are you?" Not, "Is everything okay?" Just curiosity. "I'm heading to a lecture downtown," I said. She paused, then smiled through the phone. "That sounds nice." No follow-up questions, no instructions. That felt like progress. At home, my life settled into a rhythm that belonged to me. Mornings stayed slow. Afternoons were mine to shape. Evenings no longer felt like something to endure. I cooked when I wanted to, went out when I felt like it, stayed in without explaining. I stopped preemptively reassuring people that I was fine. If they asked, I answered honestly. If they didn't, I let the silence stand. One evening, my son visited. We sat at the table with tea. He looked around the house, really looked this time. "You seem steady," he said. "I am," I replied. He nodded, then said quietly, "I think I confused helping with controlling." I didn't correct him. I let the understanding land where it needed to. Later, after he left, I stood by the window and watched the streetlights come on. The same street, the same house, but a different relationship to both. I realized then that independence isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It's the quiet confidence of knowing that your life is still yours to direct. If you're listening to this and feeling pressure to shrink, to simplify yourself for others' comfort, please remember this. Age does not cancel agency. Care does not replace consent. And silence is not the same as peace. At 71, I didn't reject my family. I reclaimed myself. And in doing so, I gave them something more honest than compliance. I gave them the truth, quietly, clearly, without apology.